just kick off. I think for everybody here, most of you know Jamie. We also have Rich Shu from SIG. I just let them introduce themselves a little bit for the people on the live stream. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Richard Su. I was with Intel Capital for 15 years. I ran China for Intel Capital for about 6 years. And then I joined Susquehanna about 3 years ago, end of 2015. So my focus has now changed to Southeast Asia. And yeah, just excited to be here and learn more about these companies.
Jamie, partner Appworks. As a VC, we're investing out of our 150 million Fund 3. Our mandate is AI, IoT, blockchain, crypto, and or Southeast Asia. Our ticket size is between 200,000 US dollars all the way up to 15 million US dollars. We're basically stage agnostic, so we're only looking for good founders that have the drive to go all the way. Very nice meeting you guys.
Great. So we're just going to kick off. So we have old China Han and one of the pioneers of early stage venture in Taiwan. But we're seeing an increasing focus on Southeast Asia and South Asia. So Jamie, can you talk a little bit about why you're increasingly focused on Southeast Asia?
Sure. So first of all, I think mobile, we're in a Mobile Only Accelerator demo day. So mobile really changed everything. So back then, there wasn't any effective distribution channel to reach a lot of customers in Southeast Asia. But with the penetration of smartphones over the past 5 years, right now, out of the 650 million people in Southeast Asia, around almost 400 million of them have smartphones. So it became easier to reach them, and of course, with the help of MOX, it's even easier if you're part of MOX. On top of that, also the economic growth. So throughout Southeast Asia, a lot of the countries are growing at 5, even 6-7% annually with their GDP, which is these days higher than China's GDP growth now. So if you missed the whole China boat over the past 20 years, Southeast Asia is your salvation. And on top of that, Southeast Asian market is actually more fragmented. So it became less appealing for bigger companies from US and China because it's very hard to tap into one single market there. So you see the bigger companies from US, China, Japan, they have been more passionate about the Indian market than the Southeast Asian market. So when they're less interested in this, it means that there's less competition, so there's more room for startups in this region to grow. So those are the 3 main factors why we're more interested in Southeast Asia, increasingly interested in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, no, so Southeast Asia has been a really interesting kind of story. When I switched my focus from China to Southeast Asia, the original hypothesis was that Southeast Asia is kind of where China was back in 2002, 2003, and the reality is that it's kind of got elements of that, and then it's kind of got other elements that are China back in 2008, 2009. As Jamie mentioned, the mobile penetration there has accelerated. Data is becoming more pervasive, which obviously opens up access to the internet to a very large population. The thing about Southeast Asia is that the demographic trends are very, very positive. In China, with the one-child policy, what you're really kind of seeing is going to be a reversal of the dependency ratio in China, and you're going to see eventually a gradual slowdown. Not in the next 10 years, but like in the next 20 years, demographic trends are going to be against China's favor unless they, start doing more immigration or more automation. Whereas in Southeast Asia, the average age in the region is like 28 or something like that. So you have a large working population that is going to continue to contribute to economic growth there. As Jamie mentioned, the average growth rate in Southeast Asia is, 5-6%. And when you see these numbers reported, it's actually on a real basis, which means that you don't account for inflation. And if you're, in somewhere like Vietnam, where you have a 6% real growth rate, your nominal inflation plus your growth is the real kind of growth rate there is more like 12%. Your prices are increasing about 12%. Your wages are increasing 10 to 12% a year, and at a 10 to 12% growth rate, you're doubling every 6 years. And for the people in these markets, that's what they really care about, right? They care about what I can buy with Vietnamese dong, from year to year. So, from that perspective, your nominal growth rate is actually pretty high. And if you think about it from, it's 10% versus 6%, 10% sounds a lot more exciting. And this is kind of what happened in China as well in the early 2000s. We kind of saw all this happening in China. And on top of that, you have urbanization that's actually happening in Southeast Asia, which is a big trend. And so you have a lot of very similar trends that you kind of see between China and Southeast Asia, except it's happening about 10 years later in Southeast Asia. I mean, that being said, Southeast Asia is a complicated market. It's really not one. It's not one market. It's really 5 different disparate markets. Indonesia is probably the only market that's kind of got real scale with 280 million people. You got Vietnam and the Philippines, each with about 100 million people. But then you have like the likes of Singapore and Malaysia, where you have pretty high, and Thailand actually, where you have pretty high GDPs, but the population is not necessarily that big. So how do you play in an environment like that? It's a pretty complicated environment, but it's something that we hope that the internet and mobile internet specifically helps to address, because I think that's the one thing that the internet does do, is that it creates a wonderfully efficient distribution system.
So you talked a little bit about the fact that it's not just one market, it's 5 markets. So when you're investing in companies, I mean, for MOX, we focus on helping companies go cross-border, and it's not just one market, it's into 5 markets or more markets. So what are the 1 or 2 things that you look for when you're looking at startups, and what are the sort of the elements of success or potential success that you look for in the companies that you're investing in, in companies that are going into Southeast Asia?
I'll start with that one. To be honest with you, I think it's the factors don't really change. It's really about the entrepreneurs. We talk to the entrepreneurs. We get a sense of how dedicated they are, how good they are at what they do. I think that's the first thing that we always look for. How trustworthy. I think honesty, integrity is a big part of big part of the equation here. The other thing that we think about is the market that they address and what their entry point for addressing that market is the product market fit there. And a lot of times it's kind of hard to tell. You're dealing with markets that aren't developed yet, but you have a hypothesis on it. And whether the hypothesis works out or not is really dependent on how good the entrepreneurs are. So those are really the 2 things that we really kind of think about when we think about early stage investing in Southeast Asia. As you kind of go into later stage, it gets a little bit easier because you have actual results that you can kind of compare across. But to be honest, Southeast Asia, there's just really not that many Series B deals. A lot of times, what happens is the valuations get run up to unreasonable levels for where they are as a business in terms of actual performance. And the trend that I kind of see right now in Southeast Asia is that companies that are raising quote unquote Series B would really kind of be raising a Series A in China. And companies that are raising Series A would really be raising a seed stage in China. So it's a matter of expectation setting, but expectations matter.
So I would agree with everything Rich just said. On top of that, I think we're looking for founders that really have the determination to build sort of a regional and sustainable company. So sometimes you see founders that are pretty smart, they're passionate about building a company, but they don't have that much passion in terms of going outside of their sort of own market. So we're really looking for founders that would want to go it all the way. And then on top of that, I think the ability to learn is very important. So like Rich said, every sub-market in Southeast Asia is different. So when you get into a market, how fast can you pick up all the signals and decide how localized your business model is going to become in that country? So what kind of things you want to keep the same, what kind of things you want to tweak so that it fits into the local market. You have to be a founder that is fast learning, and you have to be a founder that can pick up all the different signals and insights very quickly to be able to make those decisions. So really, if we're talking about investing in companies that can potentially become regional successes, then those are the two traits we look for on a founder.
So MOX is the first international accelerator to come in, and of course Appworks is the first or the most important domestic accelerator here. So we're talking about Southeast Asia, but we're sitting here in Taiwan. So
we're part of Southeast Asia.
Yeah. So we're very happy to be partnering with MOST and TTA. Look forward to that partnership. Can you just talk a little bit about what's the position of Taiwan in the market? What's the opportunity?
So I think if you look at the map, right, Taiwan has over the past 2-3 decades been coupled together with China and be called the Greater China market, right? Which makes sense over the past 20-30 years, but increasingly it's not making any sense. If you look at most of the successful Chinese internet companies, they don't have a big presence here in Taiwan. But if you look at a lot of the internet and digital companies that have a huge presence in Taiwan, they also have a huge presence in Southeast Asia. So increasingly, if you look at the digital world, Taiwan is more synonymous with Southeast Asia. And on top of that, actually within Southeast Asia, Taiwan has a lot of things that we can offer. Number one, we still have the biggest market. So if you look at e-commerce per se, Taiwan has a e-commerce market that is north of $30 billion US, which would put us at a top 10 in the world and bigger than all of Southeast Asia combined. So if you're a Southeast Asian company targeting e-commerce or e-commerce ecosystem, Taiwan is a great market for you to be had. So that's why Shopee is doing so well, because they used to generate a lot of GMV from Taiwan and use that as a base to grow their business. On top of that, Taiwan has the best supply of quality engineers at economic cost in the whole region. So, and increasingly, when we get into the AI world, if you want to go to a place where they have universities that train deep learning, machine learning, PhDs, Taiwan is the best place to go. That's why Google, Microsoft, IBM are all setting up AI research centers in Taiwan. So I see more and more Southeast Asian startups tapping into the Taiwanese engineering talent pool. For example, Carousel, Shopback, Honestbee, they're all setting up R&D shops in Taiwan. On top of that, there's also a good, a solid IPO market here in Taiwan. I think that's sort of a little bit overlooked by Southeast Asian startups. So Taiwan's capital market is actually the second largest in this region, right behind Hong Kong. But Hong Kong's capital market is more for the big cap, sort of real estate, big finance companies, whereas Taiwan has a vibrant mid-cap ecosystem or mid-cap community. So if you're an internet company, your market cap is between 300 million to 3 billion. Taiwan is the best place for you to go be listed. You can enjoy very good multiples and good liquidity. So I think pretty soon we're gonna see more and more regional mid-cap internet companies trying to get listed in Taiwan, and I see a future in Taiwan becoming sort of the home base for them to have their stocks traded. So those are the three things I think Taiwan can contribute to this ecosystem, and that's why I think Taiwan should increasingly be looked as part of the Southeast Asia ecosystem. That's why I've been promoting the term Greater Southeast Asia. I think so. Instead of Greater China, Taiwan should be part of Greater Southeast Asia.
Hey, Rich, you want to talk about Taiwan or another question?
Yeah, sure. I can
Okay.
talk about Taiwan really quickly. I think Taiwan sits at a very unique crossroads right now. I think Taiwan as a place for doing business, I think it's more advanced than a lot of places in Southeast Asia. The engineering talent here is second to none. What I find in a lot of Southeast Asian companies is the engineering talent's pretty thin, and they actually need to kind of go and figure out where to do a lot of their development. I think Taiwan's ideally suited to do that. The cost of engineers here versus the cost of hiring developers and of equivalent quality in places like Indonesia is much cheaper. Even in Indonesia now, if you want to get a country manager in Indonesia for these e-commerce businesses, it's going to cost you $12,000 a month, US. So these guys are making $200,000 a year just to be a country manager for at a startup in Indonesia. So for $200,000, I think you can find a lot of really good engineers here in Taiwan to kind of do development. I think the thing though I think is the Taiwanese ecosystem needs to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of internationalizing and being willing to take risk to kind of go international. I think there's a lot of good talent here, but I do think that it gets a little too comfortable here in Taiwan, and I think it'd be great to kind of see more Taiwanese entrepreneurs be willing to take that step and be more aggressive in terms of expanding into Southeast Asia. In terms of does Taiwan sit between China or Southeast Asia, I think it sits between both, and that's really the unique aspect of Taiwan. Taiwan plays a very unique space in the ecosystem here, and it'd be a shame to kind of see that advantage kind of pass by. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
That's great. So really appreciate your time and your thoughts. Thanks for coming to Taiwan and being in Taiwan, joining us for MOX Demo Day. So appreciate it. Thanks. Give a round of applause for our investor panel.